we join this painting already in progress. Good day, everyone. This is a 6x9 sheet of Arches, 140-pound cold press paper, and I'm just getting the last of my sketch down there. So I'm going to go with a graded wash for the sky. So I'm going to wet the background using, got a 1.5-inch flat brush there, and I'm just putting in some clean water, and then I can jump in with the graded wash. I'm going to be using yellow ochre and Davies gray for the sky. So it's going to be kind of a muted sky, a little bit of gray at the top, a little bit of gold in the middle there. And down towards the horizon, I'm going to drop in some ultramarine and some Payne's gray to develop a tree line back in the distance. So with it nice and wet, I keep adding some pigment to get the sky to the look that I want. And now with the page still quite damp, I can go in with the, that's an ultramarine and a Payne's gray, and I'm putting in a rough tree line. Also putting a bit of the yellow ochre and the Davies gray in the foreground because I've decided I wanted to have a little bit of a puddle in this one, or a little pool of water right in front of the house. So in case you haven't guessed, this is going to be wash, then ink, then wash, then ink, that sort of painting. So my foreground, I'm going to put my first coat of paint on with the yellow ochre. And with it really wet, I can drop in some olive green. And I'm just going to mop out a bit there because I think I'd like to have a bit of a highlight at the top of the grass there. That's going to be a stone fence there, so I wanted to have a bit of a highlight between the grass and the fence. So with the page still damp, I got the fan brush and I put some of the olive green and mixed it with a bit of indigo just to darken it up a bit. And I was just tapping the wet surface with the fan brush to get a grassy look in the foreground. Here's my standard approach to chimneys, which is a Davies gray and a burnt sienna, and at the base of it there, some Payne's gray. Now, given that the scene was the sky is a bit muted and a bit dull, I decided to go in with a relatively bright roof color. It's going to be shingles, so I can use whatever color I want. So I jumped in with a bit of cadmium yellow to start with, a nice wet mixture, and then I dropped in some quinacridone gold. Now the board's on a bit of a tilt, so it's running down towards the eaves trough, which I want. And now just to dirty it up a bit at the eaves trough, I'm putting in some Payne's gray. I'll also drop in a bit at the dormer and then just leave it and let the paints figure out where they want to go from there. It's creating the texture I want because I will be inking shingles in on top of that texture. Now for my stone wall in the foreground, or sorry, I guess we could call it midground at this point, that's just some raw sienna, and I'm dropping in some Payne's gray and a bit of indigo, and it's a wet in wet application. Using what have I got, a 6 round there, and I'm just dropping paint in. And as with the roof, letting it do its thing and figure out where it wants to go and create some textures. Here I'm just putting a bit of paint in at the edge of this puddle to remind myself that it actually is a puddle and I don't have painting it as a stone. So I'm just putting a bit of reflection in there, and that's just a reminder to me that it's going to be water later on. Overworked the puddle a bit. Now for my tree on the right, this is straight up wet in wet application. I loaded up my, what have I got there, a 10 or a 12 round, loaded up with clean, well, relatively clean water, and created my tree shape. And then from there, I've grabbed some olive green, and I'm just dropping it into the water. Again, the board's on a tilt, so it's going to run down to the bottom, but that is where I want my shadow anyway. So that's olive green, and then here is a mixture of indigo and a bit of undersea green, which is a darker green. Now I've decided that my light is going to be coming from the upper left on this painting, so I just dropped in a bit of yellow ochre mixed with cadmium yellow just to highlight the top of the trees on the left. They're in behind the building, so they're getting hit with a bit of light there. And I'm just dressing up the trees with a few little random leaves kicking off the side. Dropped in a bit of salt too to see if I could get a little more leafy look going. Now the foreground was a little bit washed out, so I just give it a glaze of the yellow ochre once again, and then dropped in a little more green just to darken it up a bit. And doing the same thing here with the fan brush. Got a pretty dark mixture of green and the indigo, and dropping it into the wet to create that that grassy look. And there I'm just pulling down some reflections from the house in the hopes that that looks like a puddle. So as I mentioned, we were going to go wash, then ink, then wash, then ink. Well, here's an ink portion. I got a lot of paint down, and I was losing my edges, so I decided to define the house a little bit and just add a bit of ink to it, draw in the shingles and a few details here and there. And it gives me a better idea of where the house is going or where the painting is going once I see some ink on it. My little outhouse over there. Thanks, Brunella, for the, I've got a heart on that outhouse. And now for the background there, it was looking a little blank, so I just added another line of trees a little closer so they're a little darker. And that's just a bit of the green with some ultramarine. A little negative painting there, so it outlines the outhouse and that barn that's in the background. So the trunk of my tree, that was a little wet in wet application, couldn't really see it, but I put some water in first and then dropped paint into it. Started off with burnt sienna and then went in with my my raw sienna. No, sorry, raw umber. And a bit of Payne's gray in there, just to green it up a bit. Now when my trees dried, they got a little bit light, or my tree got a little bit light, so I just wet the underside of it there, and dropping in some of that darker green, in the hopes of creating a little more shadow, and give it a better look. I think I'm going to have to add some water to that and clean up those shadows a bit. My barn in the back, again wet in wet. Give it just push it back in the distance there a bit. So I wet the surface and just dropped in a few colors and then mopped out a bit because it was a little bit too dark. Now for the main part of my structure, this is going to be a raw sienna blend. I got it really wet so that I can drop in some other colors. So I'm using all the colors that I'd used earlier. So it's a Davies gray, a burnt sienna, and a bit of Payne's gray down at the base. The base of the structure is going to be a brick, have a brick look going with kind of a crooked door in it. So I won't pay too much attention to that right now. And I just used a little bit of that raw sienna in the reflection in that puddle. Now, so we went wash, then ink, then wash, and now we're back to ink again. And this painting's starting to come together. Did really loose line work in the tree. I didn't want to overdo it. And here's the base, the the foundation of that building. That's what I was talking about. So I wanted it to be kind of a stone look, so I went with an ultramarine and dropped in some burnt sienna. I'll be inking over that as well. And then I'll get my shingles in. Irregular shingles make the painting a little more interesting. And get that dormer painted up. In case you're wondering, if you haven't been following along, that's an extra fine Lamy Safari fountain pen that I'm using. And there, we can start to add a few details here and there. Get some grasses, and now it's really coming together. Eaves trough, pretty standard application for my typical eaves trough and downspout, which is a hooker's green, Davies gray, and the burnt sienna for the rusty bits. And here I'm putting in a bit of the, I got some burnt sienna going in to just dress up the roof a bit and put some odd shingles in there. Just give the roof a bit of character. And now for some depth, really define the building, I'm putting some shadows. As I mentioned, my light's coming from the upper left, so all the shadows will be cast to the right. So that little addition's going to have a bit of shadow on it. And of course my downspouts and the side of the outhouse will have shadow. I just put a little more shadow in under the tree there as well. So that nice little balcony or deck, have a nice little bird feeder on it. We'll paint that up. It's got a board missing. And it looks like it's seen better days, so I added a bit of dirt, a bit of mold. And that about does it. And at the risk of sounding too salesy, this painting is available over on Etsy, and if you want a longer version of this video with more detail and colors and whatnot, that's over on Patreon. So, thanks for dropping by, and we'll see you again soon.